Welcome back to the Tao of Wellbeing. So today I want to talk about not a very pleasant topic, but an important one for many, which is dealing with emotional pain. Okay, so this is quite a heavy topic, and obviously emotional pain can happen for many reasons. It can happen through bereavement, it can happen through heartbreak, relationship issues, it can happen through illness, many ways that we can suffer emotionally. And different ways of responding to that, some of which are more helpful than others. So I want to explore some of these ways and just give you my take on this. So first of all, I'd like to say it's real. Okay, so I think some people have a different kind of capacity for suffering, if you like. Some people just seem to glide through life, and their kind of sine wave of their emotions is fairly shallow. No judgment. I'd quite like to be like that myself, but actually, other people tend to have a much more kind of extreme, and the troughs are really deep. Okay, so you can experience, a pretty intense level of emotional pain if you're wired that way. And then the question becomes, well, what can we do about this? There's kind of cultural stereotypes about how you're supposed to deal with that, and a lot of that isn't very helpful. And then there's kind of trained stuff like counselling training and the Samaritans who are given training, that kind of stuff. And there's the wonderful teaching of nonviolent communication, which has a massive component about empathy and how to kind of do empathy. So maybe I'll start by saying, what is really not, in my personal experience. Obviously, this is very subjective, and what doesn't help me might help others. But what my experience is very much like what they say in NVC about the things that really aren't empathy and may not help very much if someone's struggling emotionally and you do some of these things. I haven't actually got there's like a cartoon. I'm not going to try and dig around on my computer and find it, but I've got a cartoon of about 16 different little boxes of things that are not empathy that we might think are from our kind of cultural conditioning. So things like, look on the bright side, or gathering data. That's a really common one. So someone's suffering. So you ask them loads of questions, and they're like, that's not really where I want my attention to be. Um, or what else? You kind of collude with them. You say, yeah, he's a bastard. You shouldn't, you should leave him, blah, blah, blah. And you kind of dive into the kind of the narrative with them. What else? Look on the bright side, I think I've said. Um, I can't actually remember a lot of them. They might occur to me as I go. But yeah, just not very helpful responses really. Whereas the thing that they do recommend doing is simply being with that person in their pain. So literally just kind of sitting next to them. It's like you're not trying to fix it, and you can't fix it. Okay, and this is, I think, one of the big problems is that there's quite a lot going on when someone's in emotional pain and we kind of want to help them. Then there's quite a complex response to that in the person who potentially might help. And one of them is this idea that they should be able to make it better, or they want to make it better, and the fact they can't is painful. And so the attention then goes on to their inability to make it better. Um, or they feel responsible, like it's their duty to do it. And then that might create a kind of internal demand that, I don't really want to, but this person's upset, so I'm going to try and help. And I'm actually just going to make it worse because actually I don't really want to be helping for whatever reason, because I'm not resourced enough. It's not where I'm at. I don't feel qualified, whatever, but there's this sense that I should do it, but there's a kind of resentment that goes with it, and the whole thing can just go really unpleasant. And of course, the original need, which was for some empathy of the person that was in pain, can kind of get, the attention or the energy's gone somewhere else to the kind of internal system of the person that's trying to give help. So it's a really important thing for me about how we can be there for people who are suffering. And I think it's actually quite simple once you kind of have that list of things not to do, um, and you have the willingness, and you're able to say no if it's not a good time. That's really important. If you can't say no, then the chances are you'll give help in a way that actually might make things a lot worse. So it's an important training, and it's not one that we're kind of given at school. And counsellors have it. Samaritans have it. Um, I did the Samaritans training myself many years ago, and I was a Samaritan for a while. And my experience as a user of the Samaritans, as well as having been a Samaritan, is that it's very mixed. Sometimes they adhere to the training, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're kind of giving all sorts of advice which you haven't asked for. That's another thing on the list, right? Giving advice. It's a really common one. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? Of course I bloody have, because it's like I'm living with this problem. I've tried it. Or if I haven't, the fact that it worked for you doesn't mean it's going to work for me, and it's taken attention away from the emotional pain, which is really what is the issue here? Okay, so giving advice is another thing on that list, and it's generally not helpful, and yet it is the go-to response in our culture. You see it all the time on TV and that kind of stuff. So what helps? So empathic presence, even with like quite an intense level of emotional pain. And it's interesting because sometimes emotional pain can actually be almost like medically, have like a medical component. So for instance, people that have really bad migraines sometimes have an extreme emotional phase kind of before the migraine comes on. And that can be so intense that it's like, so another thing is, don't judge someone for the level of their emotional pain. It's like, it's not your call to make. They're having the experience they're having, whether you think they should or shouldn't, not your business, right? So it could be medically induced, so migraine related, and the intensity of that can be like a bereavement. It can be like absolutely overwhelming pain that's maybe got a medical component because it's migraine related, or it might be a neurological condition or something, but it might not be. It might just be life's really tough and a person's suffering. So whatever the reason, not our place to judge it. That's a really important point. It's fine to walk away from it and say, I can't deal with that, but don't go saying you shouldn't be feeling that bad because life's great and you're so ungrateful and all that kind of rubbish. Although of course gratitude is great, and this is another conversation that I think is really important for me. The whole emphasis on gratitude, it's like wonderful, yeah, but it's an end result. It's the fruit of the process of facing your pain, processing your pain, coming out the other side, and then maybe slowly kind of re-emerging with a different sense of like, okay, that was terrible, but there were some silver linings, rather than like something that's imposed. You should be grateful for your suffering because it's teaching you this, this, and this, and it's making you bigger hearted and more compassionate. No. We get there eventually organically with no pressure whatsoever. Okay, that's my take on that whole gratitude thing. Then, right, okay, so practically finding people that are able and willing to give us that kind of empathic presence when we're in deep emotional pain. It's difficult. You might expect your family to, and you might be lucky that they can, but also they might be too close. They might find it too painful to be around your suffering because it triggers a lot of suffering for them because they care about you. So family isn't always the best place to go. Friends, some of them will or won't be able, willing, available, may or may not be. So reaching, building this network is really important. Finding out who can and who can't. I would say a good place to look is nonviolent communication, right? So when it's done well, there are some good trainers out there. They're not all brilliant in my experience, but there are some really amazing trainers out there and practitioners. And they generally have the understanding that this is a basic human need, this need for empathy. And you're not going to have to go through all these kind of layers of like trying to explain what empathy is and what it isn't and how, it's just there, it's understood. So if you can find anyone from NVC, nonviolent communication, they may well be a good starting point. Samaritans are great. Maybe you've got like a religious community, that would be wonderful. If you've got like a priest you can talk to, or like like with the Quakers, if you've got like a friend, they call them in the Quakers, friend with a capital F. All of those are options. Samaritans, of course, give them a try, and don't be discouraged if you don't get a particularly helpful response. Try again. You always get someone different, which is potentially a problem because actually there's something about that continuity which is really helpful. If someone kind of knows your story and you don't need to go back to the beginning and explain all the kind of details. Excuse me a moment. So yeah, finding people that can just completely hear you. This is a phrase that I kind of knew anyway from nonviolent communication, the need to be heard, or the need for empathy. And then I was talking to a Samaritan and she identified that need explicitly, the need to be completely heard. And I was like, yeah, exactly. And it can be a lot that you're needing to be heard about. There can be some really deep pain. It can be a complex, multiple stimuli for this pain. And if someone just hears it, just occasionally lets you know that they've heard it, maybe ask the odd clarifying question, not in a kind of like rapid fire data gathering way, but it's like, have I understood correctly? And, maybe linking it to your needs and feelings. That's another thing they do in NVC. So it's like, so maybe you're feeling like, I don't know, grief stricken and you really miss this person. You've got a real need for connection, or, you kind of do the needs and the feelings bit, which I'm not going to get into too much here. But that's just one port of call. So you find someone that can actually hear you completely, not judge you, accept you, maybe even physically hold you if it's appropriate. Just like, hold me while I cry. It's such a kind of unmanly thing to ask for. Please hold me while I cry. It's like, fuck that, if it's unmanly, I don't care. It's like pain is pain. A lot of people don't make it through. There's a high suicide rate. I'd rather, you know, I'd rather be vulnerable, and I'd like to encourage people to be vulnerable, to ask for the help they need. So I think that's all I've got to say about help from other people, other than maybe medical professionals. So it could be that the time has come to talk to a doctor about medication. It's not a path I've gone down myself, but it might well be something that conversation that you need to have. So antidepressants, anxiety medication, that kind of stuff. And I'm absolutely not qualified to talk about that stuff. So look into that if you think it's appropriate. Then what can you do on your own, right? So there's various practices and traditions that can help us with this. One of them is Dzogchen from Tibet with the teacher Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, who's an absolutely wonderful teacher. And he has this lovely notion of giving yourself a spacious, luminous, warm hug. Spacious, luminous, warm hug. So there's not always someone available to hold us while we cry, but we have that capacity. We have this kind of bigger part of ourselves that can actually compassionately, compassion is a huge part of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, other types of Buddhism. We can turn that compassion upon ourselves, and we can hold ourselves through our pain. And we might be doing that in a very formal way, in a chair with a posture, or sitting cross-legged, and using. There's a lot of guided meditations for this, by the way. He's got his own channel, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, and there's loads of other, really good guided meditations on dealing with emotional pain, and I really encourage you to use them. So yeah, that particular tradition, him, and then there's the Taoist tradition that I'm part of, where we have a thing called inner dissolving. So the emotions, it's generally understood that the emotions are kind of alive somewhere in our body. Now, some people's experience may be that that's not the case, and it's possible that's because they just haven't kind of developed that capacity, that kind of proprioception, that physical kinesthetic sensation awareness of emotions in their body. But generally, if you look for it, I'm confident that most people find that they feel sad, but actually there's somewhere in the body that's kind of more obviously charged with that energy than other places. So sadness might be in your chest, it might be in your belly, anxiety might be in your heart. I get a lot of emotional energy in my head. And so what we do with inner dissolving is we rest our awareness on the sensation, on the strong emotion in our body, and we just allow it to kind of soften until it goes away. No pressure. You're not actively dissolving it, you're letting it release. Okay, and that's a whole training. Energy arts, if you're interested in that. Bruce Francis, energy arts. There's also mindfulness practices. So a lot of the mindfulness is breath and body scan. Body scan's good because your emotions are within your body, as discussed just now. But not all the mindfulness has a component that works with emotions. Some of the traditions do, some of them don't. I'm trying to think which one to do offhand. Yeah, Meditation Oasis. There's this woman, I can't remember her name, but her website and her business is called Meditation Oasis. She's got some really good guided meditations on working with emotions. And there's a couple of other mindfulness ones that do it. But I guess the thing here that we're talking about is holding ourselves through our emotional pain. It's like ideally other people can hold us sometimes, but we're not always going to have access to that. So how can we hold ourselves? And that involves a lot of self-kindness, involves a lot of willingness to let be what is, right? So it's like, I'm not going to pretend that I'm not, heartbroken by this breakup or whatever. There's a delightful phrase, putting lipstick on a pig and calling it a beauty queen, right? I don't think that's a helpful thing to do. It's like pain is pain. And as I mentioned before, we might eventually in an organic way kind of move through that and get to a place of gratitude and recognize some of the silver linings. But while it's there, and it's not pleasant, And mindfulness techniques, meditation techniques can really help with that. Also, if you're well enough to go into nature, it's just so supportive. Being around trees, feet on the earth, being near moving water, I find particularly helpful. I did that this morning. Just sitting by this very fast flowing water and I was doing some practices, but also just not even doing anything particularly deliberate, just kind of feeling the energy of nature, letting the water kind of tuning into that sense of liquidity and movement and flow, which then allows the emotions within me to be less kind of congealed and more kind of flowing. So is there anything else? I mean, the usual stuff, diet, exercise, Tai Chi, yoga, all that kind of stuff, but that's getting into more, specifically general health, well-being. And I just wanted to talk more specifically today about emotional pain and how to deal with it. And that's some of the takes of some of the ideas that I have about it from my own experience. Fairly recent, relevant experience. I've been right through the mill of late in the past couple of years with an ongoing illness. And, apart from the physical symptoms, there's been a whole emotional component. And yeah, I think I've probably said enough. Just to also say, if you can try and remain connected, and it's not always easy. And for anyone that knows someone that's going through emotional pain, please try and understand that it's not easy for them to always be initiating. If whether it's through physical illness or just through the kind of mental health problems that they have, they may not be participating fully in social life. So they may not be turning up to your event. They may not be going to the workshop. You're not going to be having these kind of casual interactions where you either nourish existing connections or make new ones, right? So if you're concerned about people in emotional pain, I mean, train to be a counselor, that's a wonderful thing to do, or be a Samaritan, another wonderful thing to do. But also, I think, educating ourselves about how we can best help, or asking someone, it's like, I understand you need support with your emotional pain. Could you please teach me how to do that for you? If you've got that kind of humility and that willingness to do that, again, only if you actually have the resources, then that could be a really useful thing to do. And again, just don't let people fall off your radar, because people with emotional pain often, they're not out in the world, they're struggling, they're at home, they're in the dark, the sun might be shining, but they're in a darkened room because they can't handle it. And the longer they're there, they might be rotting, and it would be really nice. It makes such a difference if you could step into their world and just talk to them, help them out, even if it's just, quick cup of tea, or, you could even say, I don't want to talk about how awful life is, but I'm checking in on you. These are just suggestions, from my own experience. So there it is, dealing with emotional pain. I hope that was helpful to someone. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.